So now we turn our lens from the domestic to the regional international with Maria Omelicheva from the University of Kansas, whose paper is entitled "Beyond Economic Contagion: Regional Consequences of Russia's Economic Recession."
Thank you very much for the introduction. So, as we all know, in 2014, Russia was hit by a triple whammy of the plummeting oil prices, the Western sanctions, and its own counter sanctions. And this hit Russia's population, especially the most vulnerable groups in the society. But Russia's economic recession also spread to the neighboring states connected to Russia through economic, political, and demographic ties. Countries from Europe to the republics of Central Asia had seen the depreciation of their local currencies, and it triggered inflation, speculations in the currency markets, despite considerable interventions of the central banks of these republics. Although the local currencies weakened vis-a-vis the US dollar, they didn't weaken fast enough to avoid strengthening against the Russian ruble. So as a result, earning power of the millions of labor migrants from Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, some of the most remote dependent states decreased as well. The crisis coincided with the launch of a new regional entity, the Eurasian Economic Union. Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyzstan in particular, entered this regional organization with the hope of benefiting from increased trade with Russia. And in 2015 and 2016, the trade turnover of these republics with Russia and all other members of the EU with Russia declined. It picked up a little bit in the first half of 2017, but also favored Russia more than other members of the EU. In an effort to balance state budgets, all regional governments had to slash spending on infrastructure, healthcare, education, and even salaries in the government sector. And the government of Turkmenistan, led by Muhamedov, announced an end to government subsidies on water, utilities, and so on and so forth. So, while this recession in Russia, but also the ongoing oil and commodities prices at the global level had a devastating impact on the neighbor's economy, I argue that it also provided Russia with an opportunity to strengthen its position in these states. Why? Well, the crisis, so the governments who entered a period of austerity saw rise in dissent, and a lot of this dissent has either been triggered by worsening economic conditions or had economic roots. So we already heard about protests in Belarus. Armenians came out in the streets, so did Azerbaijanis. Kazakhstan saw protests against the land reform. And we also know that Russia has traditionally played on the post-Soviet government's concerns about political destabilization, and it has actively disseminated and profited from the fears of popular discontent fomented from abroad. So it has branded itself as the only force to defend these regimes from subversion, and successfully sold an idea of Moscow as a safe haven for the toppled political elites. It is important to note, however, that this discourse has been supported with the sustained or increased military and security assistance to these governments at the time when US and EU presence in these states has been declining. So just to give you a few examples, Russia reinforced its military bases in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan with new armaments and equipment. It continued moving towards establishing its common air defense system by transferring air systems to Kazakhstan and Belarus free of charge, granted those were second-hand. It has made some special arrangements with Minsk and Astana to allow them to procure new surface-to-air missile systems. If we looked at all of the joint military exercises and trainings, those have gone unabated, and importantly, Uzbekistan, which had not had joint military exercises with Russia, is going to have one in October 2017, and just this past spring, they took part in preparing joint military exercises under the auspices of the Anti-Terrorism Center. This was the first joint military exercise under the auspices of this organization that took place in May 2017. Russia's economic levers have never been strong, but crisis strengthened some of the economic tools that Russia has been used to gain political concessions from these regimes. So I'm talking about debt forgiveness and regulations of labor migration. So Kyrgyzstan and Belarus were able to resettle their outstanding payments with Russia. Russia forgave Soviet-era debt to Uzbekistan, and it used it as an opportunity to strengthen economic cooperation with Tashkent as well. So in 2016, Russia's Gazprom signed a landmark agreement with Uzbekneftgaz to purchase natural gas from Uzbekistan, thus filling a void left by a complete suspension of energy trade with Turkmenistan. And of course, the regulations of labor migration, Russia introduced stringent test requirements for labor migrants from non-EU members. The Moscow government, the Moscow city government increased the prices of labor permits for laborers from non-EU member states. So these are, again, just some of the examples of the ways in which this crisis benefited Russia. So in terms of its relations with the neighbors. If Russia's economy enters another period of recession as a consequence of this new round of sanctions, but also continued low oil prices and a failure to reform, the neighboring states' economic performance will slide with it as well. And the countries that are going to be particularly hardly hit are the ones who are dependent on Russia for energy, because energy enterprises were targeted by the current round of sanctions. Whether Moscow decides to deploy negotiations over the energy prices as its economic leverage or promises of support to the ruling elites in case of a political crisis, Russia will be better off than its neighbors as a result of the economic downturn. I also think that this is a moment that presents opportunity for the United States and the European Union to reconsider their approach to the states of the region and Russia itself. I joined a course of analysts who've been arguing that the United States need to take those states as themselves, as the stand-alone states, rather than the helpmates to Washington's policy in other parts of the world. And of course, the ongoing standoff between Moscow and Washington has not only put a drain on these national economies, but also constrained the maneuvering space and foreign policy of those republics. And the European Union needs to think about whether it wants to compete or complement its policy in the region and add strategic areas to its current policy of investment and trade with the states to be really successful in these areas. And of course, I cannot not talk about China, although in the interest of space, I didn't really talk much about it in my memo, and I'm not going to talk much about it here. So yeah, in Central Asia in particular, China is the only economic counterweight to Russia. However, as we all know, it also experienced some economic slowdown, and it affected external demand for Chinese products, and further economy prices decline. We also know that Central Asian population and governments are fearful and suspicious of Chinese presence in those republics. China has invested considerably in a variety of infrastructure projects that are furthering its goal of building the Silk Road Economic Belt project. One of the issues with those projects is that China invests, it wants to be the owner of all those new enterprises and projects, and it wants to have its own laborers come from China and work at those enterprises. Countries like Uzbekistan, which are facing a threat of internal migration from rural to urban population, they really want to have more joint enterprises with the local governments, stakes in those enterprises, and having local laborers to work at those projects. So, and China has not been very willing to have more of those joint enterprises. So it also continues limiting Chinese influence in those states. Okay, that's it.